Good morning, church. My name is Kaylee Swanson. I serve here at Canaan as worship and kids volunteer. Our scripture reading this morning is from Exodus 2, 1-3. Please stand if you're able for the reading of God's word. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and dabbed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated.
She graduated yesterday, so we gave her one of those words you got to be real careful how you say. Well, happy Mother's Day to all of the mamas, grandmamas, adopted mamas, bio mamas, spiritual mamas in the room. We are glad that you are here. If you have a Bible, open up to Exodus chapter 2. I know we were there beginning of last year, and we're going back there because we're journeying through showing my cards. The letter to the Hebrews written by someone who we don't necessarily know who it was. And in Hebrews chapter 11, in this hall room of faith, we read in chapter 11, verse 23, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict, which is just what we read. And as Pastor Daniel and Brian and myself began to talk, like, what scripture do we want to preach on when it comes to Mother's Day? We're like, well, what does Hebrews say anything about? Is there a mom in Hebrews that we can talk about as we're just kind of journeying through Hebrews because we're not that creative of human beings. So this morning, we're going to talk about Moses' mom. And as a father and a dude who was writing about mothers all week long, as I'm like writing this sermon, I'm going like, this is true for moms because we see it true of Moses' mom. But for the other half or other part of us in the room that are not moms and will never be a mom, what we're going to find that's true in Moses' mom's life, what we're going to find is true in Moses' mom's faith that is commendable and worthy is not just true of a mom. It's true of anyone that's seeking to follow Jesus and help others do the same. And Jesus told us to be disciples who go and make more disciples. And so if you are not a mom in the room, don't check out. What we're going to see in the life of Moses' mom, it can be universally true for all of us as we seek to follow Jesus. But if you are a mom in the room, I'm going to mostly talk to you for the next 35-ish minutes. I can speak, I think. We'll find out. So if you have a Bible, open up to Exodus chapter 2. And what we're going to see is that a mother's faithful influence shapes eternity. It's not just a great line from Gladiator that what we do in this life echoes in eternity. It's true in the life of a mom, that a mom's faithful influence in the life of her children, or grandchildren, or great-grandchildren shapes eternity. It shapes their eternity. It shapes their family's eternity. And we see it's true here. And we see that the eternity of Moses, and then you kind of just play out that story, Moses to the rest of the people of God, their lives are shaped because Moses' mom did 3 things, and God called Moses' mom to do 3 things. God called Moses' mom and a mom to love her child more than her life, to trust God's plan despite what she sees, and to invest her life in discipling her child. First, God calls a mother to love her child more than her life. A mother is called to love her child more than her own life. Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman, and the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. First thing we see is that God calls a mother to love her child more than her own life, which is exactly, I don't know if I'm skipping ahead in my own brain, it's exactly what Jesus said a good friend does. No greater love as this than one would lay his life down for his friend. Socially, we got to understand what's going on, and then we'll get into the details of what's happening in verses 1 and 2. Socially, the people of God in Exodus chapter 2 are slaves in Egypt. They arrived in Egypt at the end of the story of Genesis with the 12 brothers when they pretended like one of them was dead, and then Joseph went off to Egypt and he brought the rest of the family there, and everything was going really well for them at the end of the book of end of the book of Genesis. And then you open up Exodus, and it's still going well, and then it says that one Pharaoh died, and then another one rose who didn't know Joseph, and then he got really afraid, and we read that in chapter 1, verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who didn't know Joseph, and he said to his people, "Behold, these people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. So socially, there's been a change of power. And the information of the day has not been passed on about who Joseph was and how he allowed Egypt to maintain economic status inside of a famine. And power changes, and with power change comes memory loss. They forget who Joseph and his family were, and they become afraid of them, and they begin to enslave them. From change comes ignorance, from ignorance comes fear, and from fear comes suffering, affliction, and an abuse of power. And then the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, put an edict out that we'll read later, that all the baby boys born to a Hebrew midwife or to a Hebrew woman were meant to be thrown into the Nile to drown and die. But the baby girls, they're fine. They can live, because the plan was, just like Braveheart, to intermarry with all of the Hebrew girls and then make the Hebrew girls have Egyptian babies. They were just going to genetically weed them out. That's what's going on socially. Now let's talk about the details of Moses' birth. First, Moses' mom and dad, in faith and probably some fear, like they do what married people do, and they try to conceive, and they do conceive, and they bear a kid. And there's no genetic testing. There's no ultrasound. Like, they don't know. They just know that she's pregnant, and at some point she's going to give birth to this baby. And when the baby comes out, they're going to find whether it's a boy or a girl, and whether the life of that child is in danger or not. But in faith, they say, no, we're going to trust God, that he says that children are a blessing, and one day he's going to bring a child who's going to rescue our people. And so in faith, we're just going to walk with God and what he has for us. And she bears a son. I remember when Jack was born. It was April 2023. I was convinced that Jack was baby Shiloh, which was the girl name we'd picked out. And without a shadow of doubt, like, we were having a girl. I'm girl dad. I'm totally here for it. Now I have 2 sons, and I'm not totally sure what to do with them. But I'm convinced that Jack is a girl. And we didn't find out. We just liked the surprise at the end. And so we talked through at the hospital, like, hey, baby's going to be born, and you're going to hold the baby, and I'm going to see, and then I'm going to announce to the world whether this is a boy or a girl. And Jack comes out, and they hold Jack up, and I'm just like staring and going, that's not a girl. And I'm just like staring him down, and the doctor's like, Dad. And I'm like, no, Dad, this is your part. I'm like, oh, everybody say hi to Jack, because it's a boy. And I'm like freaking out internally of like, now I have a son, and he's going to be like me, and he's going to look at me. And like, I was all here for being the girl dad that spoiled him and got to be the greatest man in all of their life until some other hooligan came along, and now there's a boy. I can't imagine being Moses' mom. I can't imagine being Moses' dad. It wasn't just like a reality shock of like, you were convinced that life was going one way and now it's going another. It's that one of these children, according to the law of the land, got to live, and the one that you had, according to the law of the land, is going to get thrown into the river to drown and die. And if they keep the boy, not only is the boy going to die, but they're going to die with him. And that's what happens when you break the law of the ruler and the most powerful ruler of the day and age of the land. You either go to jail, but they're already slaves, so you can't really put a slave in jail. They don't do a whole lot for you then, but you can take their life. And so it says that they hid Moses, that she hid Moses for 3 months because she saw that he was fine. Now, first, I don't understand how they hid a child for 3 months. They're not quiet creatures. Miracle number 1, Moses survived hidden for 3 months. But second, the word here for fine is the Hebrew word for good. It's the same word used in Genesis 1 and 2. When God spoke the world into existence, he looked at what he had made, and then he declared that it was good. There's moral implications. They saw this baby boy, and they said that he was good because a human soul is a good and a beautiful thing to be cherished, to be celebrated. And in this case, sacrificed for. Because we sacrifice for good things. We're not meant to sacrifice good things. We sacrifice for them. And so they hid the Hebrew child. The word for hid is the same Hebrew word for treasured. They didn't just hide it away of, oh, let's hide this so no one can find it. Like, that was true. There was a sense of that. Like, we don't want someone to find this baby. But they were hiding it because they treasured it. Because he was precious to them. because it was their little baby boy. And Moses' mom hides Moses because he's valuable. And in hiding Moses and keeping Moses, which was the right thing to do, she made the choice to love Moses more than her own life. She takes her life in hands of the law if she gets found out when she says, no, I'm going to protect this baby boy and I'm going to keep him and I'm going to treasure him and I'm going to hold him close. Because God calls a mom to love her child more than her life, because that's the call of every Christian. I already quoted it, John 15. This is my commandment, that you love one another. As I have loved you, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. God calls a mother to love her child more than her own life, because love requires sacrifice. We know this. Love requires sacrifice, but the choice to sacrifice is joyful when what you're sacrificing for is a treasure. It still is a sacrifice. It still hurts, but it's not a hard choice when it's something you value and is a treasure to you. It's the parable of the treasure hidden in the field. The man was out digging randomly, and what does he find? He finds a treasure, and then he buries it up. And then he goes in his joy, it says he sells all that he has to go buy the field to have the treasure. He gives it all away for the chance to have this one thing. And that's exactly what Moses' mom's doing. In her joy, she sacrifices and is willing to sacrifice anything and everything for the one thing she treasures most. And God calls every mom to love her child more than her life. Which brings me to my second point, because this kind of love requires a deep, deep faith. Second, God calls a mother to trust God with her child more than herself. God calls a mother to trust God with her child more than she'd trust herself with her child, which is true of moms and dads. We're called to trust God with the children that he's given us more than we trust ourselves with them. I already mentioned it, but the king of Egypt had put out this edict saying that all baby boys born to a Hebrew woman should be killed. It's starting to sound like the story of Jesus when he was born in Exodus 1:15. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you have served as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see to them on the birth stool, if it's a son, you shall kill him, but if it's a daughter, she shall live. Verse 22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that's born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. It's an impossible situation, right? The midwives are told to kill the babies as soon as they come out. The Egyptian neighbors are told when your Hebrew neighbor has a baby boy, you're just meant to go bust into the house, take the baby, and chuck him in the river. And you're Moses' mom and dad. And you've been expecting this baby. And no one's hiding that she's expecting this baby. And at some point, she has the baby. And I don't know how they hid this baby for 3 months, but the midwives are told to kill them when they come into the world, and their Egyptian neighbors are told to bust into their house, take them, and throw them in the river. So what's Moses' mom going to do? She's up against the world power of the day, recovering from giving birth, and what's she going to do? She's going to trust God with her kid. She's going to trust God with her child. Verse 3. And when she could hide him no longer, he started not sleeping through the night. It's funny. Ha ha ha, yay. Or none of your children are currently sleeping through the night, which is why that's not funny for you. Mine woke up at 1:30 last night. Yes. When she could no longer hide him, she took him for a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with the correct way to say that, I will not say bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And she stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. And now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying, and she took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrew children. Verse 7, then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call for you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. The child went and called the child's mother. So Miriam goes, calls Moses' mom, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Moses' mom, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I'll give you your wages. So the woman, Moses' mom, took Moses and nursed him. Relief to the tension of the story. But did you catch it? Moses' mom puts Moses in a bucket and then puts that bucket in the river and says, God bless you. I hope you'll be okay. We read this, I remember the Felt stories. We're like, oh no, it's fine. Like he's going to make it down the river. And then I remember watching The Prince of Egypt early on in the early 2000s. And there's all the crocodiles that are coming out. And it actually doesn't look like Moses is going to make it. And we read, there's like, oh yeah, no, it's fine. He's just going to go in the basket in the Nile River. And then the daughter of the king is going to get him. It's going to be totally okay. No! She put her baby boy in a bucket in the river and said, I hope you're okay. And then she sent her daughter to like go watch. Like, what's her daughter going to do? Jump in the river and like get the baby boy and then like bring him back to the start and go, all right, try again. But she put the basket in the Nile, and the basket just happens to come by Pharaoh's daughter at the exact time that she just happens to be bathing in the river. And Miriam, Moses' older sister, just happens to be near enough by to see what's going on and be seen by Pharaoh's daughter and get called over, and just happens to offer up the idea of, do you want me to go find someone to nurse this baby? And she just happens to say yes, and just happens to be Moses' mom. Like, what is happening? I remember reading this as a young kid and be like, oh, that's just a story. But then you back up, you're like, this is crazy. There's no way all of these events just begin to line up. And the woman who just happens to get to take chosen to love and care for and nurse this little baby for the next 2 to 6 years and get paid for it is his mom. Why? Because she trusted God with her child more than she trusted herself. If she would have kept the baby, like none of this would have played out. But she trusted God with her kid more than herself, and God richly blessed her faith and her trust in him, because God is sovereign over all things. From the current of the Nile to the crocodiles in it, he's sovereign over all things and working all things together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. And it's one thing to say that God is sovereign. It's one thing to read that God is sovereign and watch these details of the stories just happen to line up. It's another thing to live it out when it's your kid. It's another thing to live it out when you're Moses' mom and dad. And every mom, every parent is called to trust God with their child more than they trust themselves with their child. And that's scary. Like, there's no way around it. Because while we might not be putting 3 months old into a basket into the river, there comes a moment where we have to let go of our kids and trust God with them more than we can trust ourselves. There comes the moment, it might be when they go off to kindergarten or first grade or second grade, when they go to the new school. It may come when they go to youth camp for the first time and like you're not there and you're trusting other adults with a background check who love Jesus, like with your kid, around other teenagers who have not passed that background check and need to take a shower. It may come when they graduate high school and they go off to school or to a job, but like they're going off, like they're going somewhere. It may come when they move out. It may come when they get married. It may come when they get that job and they've had that kid and they move on the other side of the country, and you're just not going to see them and be in their life as much anymore, despite how great technology is. That later I'm going to call my mom and I can talk to her and I can FaceTime her and I can do the same with, like, this is great. But there's still an incredible distance between here and Texas. Thanks be to God. You might have to trust God with your kid when they start making choices as an adult that they are making that don't align with the faith you taught them or what the Bible says. And you can't change their minds. You can't do it for them. You can't fix it. You can't rescue them. But you do have to trust God with them because you really don't have another choice. The call for every mom, for every parent, is to trust God with their child more than they trust themselves, because they were his kid first. God has blessed you with this son, with this daughter. He has entrusted you with this son, with this daughter, but they were his kid first. They're his kid first. You're there to steward them, to manage them, to love them until they return to him. And so you trust God with whom God has entrusted to you. That doesn't mean you don't try. That doesn't mean you don't pray. That doesn't mean you don't hurt, cry, laugh, have deep, deep joy. but it does mean that you have faith and that you have trust in the God of their salvation who is sovereign over them and their life and their choices too. Which brings me to the last point. God calls a mother to invest her life in discipling her child. God calls a mother to invest her life in discipling her child. Now, I'm going to talk about moms, as I have, but dads, this isn't solely on her. And this is my singular dad excursus of the entire morning. It's on us too. You are the spiritual pace setter of your household and your family. You are the spiritual thermostat of your children and your marriage. It's on us too, and maybe even more. If you were a partner in the procreation of those children, you are a partner in their spiritual formation. And there's no getting around it. I've been around church long enough that I've watched when dads don't step up, moms do. But that doesn't mean that dads weren't meant to. You're in this together. Moses' mom and dad, when they saw the child was beautiful, they chose to hide him. Moses' mom and dad, in their faith, conceived and bore a son and hid him and treasured him because he was beautiful. They were there together, lockstep with this child, praying for the Lord to be sovereign over him. They were there together. Now, that's all I got. Come back on Father's Day. God calls a mother to invest her life in discipling her children. Investing your life to disciple your child will take at least 3 things. 1, you teach them God's rescue story. You teach them God's rescue story. Verse 3, that's one of my favorites. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch, and she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. This is where Justin gets mad at Bible translators because they never translate the same word the same way. They start being Bible interpreters and not translators. And you end up losing the wordplay that Moses, who wrote Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that he's been pinning together. The word for basket isn't basket. It's also not bucket, tier. He didn't put him in a Menard's bucket and just say, go down the river. The word for basket is the word for ark, which is what we see in the story of Noah. Noah went to build an ark. I bet he used a hammer. So let's all use a hammer. Yeah, my child likes the hammer song. It's real fun. It also talks about using a skateboard. You can't use a skateboard to build an ark, Daddy. No, you can't. But the word for basket isn't basket. It's the Hebrew word tebah, which is the word for ark. And it appears only 28 times in the entire Hebrew Bible, in the book of Genesis and in the book of Exodus. 25 of those 28 times are in Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9, which is where we get the story of Noah and the arky. And then the other 3 of the 28 times are here in Exodus chapter 2, verses 3 and 5. It's nowhere else in the entire Bible. 25 of the 28 times are when it's talking about Noah built the ark. And then here, it's Moses' mom and dad put him into a tebah. They put him into a ark. Not a basket, not a little boat, not a canoe, not a baby floaty. They put him in an ark, and they sent the ark down the river. Why does Moses use that word? Not because it was huge, not because it was giant, but because he wanted us to see the story. That Moses' mom puts baby Moses into a little baby ark, then puts that baby ark with baby Moses into a little baby flood called the Nile. And you're meant to read that and go, oh, he's not in a basket, he's in an ark. The last time this word showed up was when it looked like God was going to destroy the world, but there was a family that was faithful and had trust in God and was righteous. And God put them in he put them in an ark. It said an ark. They put him in an ark. And if God put them in an ark like God put Noah in an ark, then they're going to make it through the storm some way, somehow, and God's going to bring them safely to the other side. There's a chance. But we read they put him in a basket. And silly Bible translators, that's not the word. Put him in an ark into a little flood that pales in comparison to what happened to Noah. And God's calling Moses' mom, and he's calling us as the readers to say, no, he's doing the same thing over again. Let's trust him in the same ways. Moses, who's writing the story, is teaching us. And while contend his mother taught him about God's rescue story. He's been doing something, and he's been using shadows. And what Colossians say, shadows that led to a substance. And so you teach them this rescue story. How did Moses know to write this down? If he spends 2 to 6 years being raised by his mom, which I know is quite the gap, but all scholars agree it's somewhere between 2 and 6. Some say 3 to 5, so I'm just going to say 2 to 6. getting taught by his mom who he is, where he comes from, how he landed back in her literal lap because she put him in an ark, and God was sovereign over him, and God shut him in, and God watched out for him, even through the worst of storms. She teaches her child the rescue story of God, and we're called to do the same. To teach them, to show them, to help them experience the story that we repeat so often, that God created the world good, and we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but God was going to send a son who was going to redeem the world, and he's going to make all things good. First, you teach them the rescue story, and you realize this thread that's tying from Genesis to Revelation. Second, you surround them with God's people. You teach them God's story, and you surround them with God's people, because we all know it takes a village. But living in the West, we like to do things on our own. We don't live as a village. We just want a village. And we all say that we need a village, but yet we're often unwilling to accept help or ask for help from a village. But we all know it takes a village, and we're meant to be a part of one another's village. That's why God is making us into one new family, into one new people. And moms, you don't have to do it alone. And I'll contend that you can't, not because you're not awesome, but because you are human. None of us can do this alone. Dads can't do it alone. Moms can't do it alone. Grandma, great-grandma, we cannot do it alone. Because just like in the beginning, it's not good for us to be alone. So Moses' sister, Miriam, follows the little ark with little Moses and watches over him. Mom enlists help of big sister to watch out for baby brother. And then Miriam speaks up. That's some courage that she's probably seen modeled in mom's life. She speaks up to the daughter of Pharaoh and says, I know somebody. Also, why are you peeping on her bath time? That's weird. But she just pops up oh, I know that baby. I know someone who can take care of him. And she, in some faith and courage, speaks up that she's probably seen in mom and in dad. And then she runs and goes and gets mom and brings mom to Pharaoh's new adopted mom and says, hey, I'll take care of him. But if Miriam wasn't there, if Moses' mom hadn't asked for some help, even from one person, they would have found someone who could nurse the baby. It might have been a Hebrew, it might have been an Egyptian, but it probably wouldn't have been Moses' own mother. But she surrounds Moses with other godly people, even if it's just one other person. Because we all need godly people around us. Your children need godly people around them. And to look out for them, to love them, to disciple them when you're not around. And sometimes those people are answered prayers, particularly when your kids get older. You eventually don't get to control who their friends are. But when they're younger, which is a lot of the screaming children in this wonderful place, so many of our kids here, you kind of do get to pick and choose to a degree who they're around, who they hang out with, what other kids, what other families they're with, who they get shaped by, what responses they see. So surround them with godly people who will watch out for them when you're not around, when you're not looking and you are around. Because despite what we want them to think, we do not have eyes in the back of our heads. And we can't see everything, so we need godly people around us who can see what we can't in us and in them and in what's going on in their life. I remember I was so stuck as a teenager. Shocker. I wanted a Mustang so bad. And I was the bratty baby little kid whose dad ran the hospital and had more money than what they needed to put food on the table with. And he was like, I don't understand, Dad. You run the hospital. Why can't I have a Mustang? Eventually, Jesus worked on that part of my life. But I wanted it so bad, and the economic crisis hit of 2008, and prices for everybody went up, and I didn't understand. My brother got this little truck. Why can't I have this little car? And I am such a brat, and eventually, one of our youth workers, he pulls me aside and says, hey, you really want that Mustang, don't you? Yeah, I want a Mustang, and they let me test drive it, and now I can't have it, and I don't understand. I was such a great teenager. And he's like, Justin, do you ever think that your parents would want to give you the Mustang? If they did, they would. Okay. Do you think your parents are that mean? No. Okay. Do you think that they want to do that? If they could, they would. Probably. And do you think they're not doing it, not because they're mean, but because they love you and know what's best and they're trying to like not just waste a bunch of money because everything's expensive right now. Yeah. And didn't they like get you a Jeep that was used and new to you, but like it's yours and you don't have to worry about it and you don't have to put gas in it and you don't have to pay the bills for it. And eventually if you do maybe potentially wreck it, like you're not going to pay for that either. Yeah. So did they actually short you or are they just taking care of you? They take care of you. And then when my 16th birthday rolled around, that same youth worker showed up and said, "Hey, I got you something." Punk. He pulled out a Matchbox Mustang. He said, "Hey, I know your dad couldn't do it, but I could." And a deep contentment, as deep as it can for a 15-year-old, began to set in my soul that maybe my mom and dad do know what they're doing, and maybe they do care about me, and maybe I don't need that Mustang, and I just need to trust my parents as an act of trusting God. That would never have happened in a conversation with my mom and dad. Never was going to happen. But it would happen in a conversation with another adult who was their friend, who was over at the house all the time, that may or may not, I can't prove it, was told to have that conversation with me. I don't know. But they surrounded me with godly people, both my peers and other people that were older than me. So that when my parents weren't around, when my parents couldn't see, and when I wouldn't listen to my folks, we'll delete that from the recording later, there would be other people to speak wisdom into my life. And we all need it for our children, and we all need it for us. We surround them with godly people. And the third, you invest your life in discipling your child as you shape their identity. Verse 9. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take the child away and nurse him for me, and I'll give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew old, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water," which is what Moses means. Verse 11. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. Moms, you will shape the identity of your children. You'll shape how they see themselves. They'll shape how they see the world. You'll shape how they see God and the scriptures. You'll inform how they think about themselves, what thoughts run through their mind when they hear their name, when they look at themselves in the mirror. And I don't know if you caught it, but in verse 11 it says Moses went out to his people, not to the slaves, not to the oppressed ones. He went out to his people. Moses knew who he was. He knew he was a Hebrew and knew it was his people that were enslaved. His mom somehow, between those first few years of life, had nurtured his identity in his mind in those 3, 4, 5 years of raising him. And in my very, very brief Google survey, because I'm not a psychologist, I did find out that a child's self-image begins developing in infancy and firmly is established by age 5. That's pretty scary, as someone whose daughter just turned 5. But also in thinking of Moses knew who he was because his mom got to raise him and love him and care for him. And he knew who he was before he walked back in that palace. Because moms will shape the identity of their children. And identity doesn't stop at just who they believe they are. It spills over to whose they are and why they're here. Like moms, you will teach your children that they belong to, you will or you won't, but like you will be influential in teaching your children that they belong to God and they were created for him. They don't belong to you. They don't necessarily just belong to their dad. Like they don't belong to themselves. Like they belong to God. They were made by God, for God, and through him and for him, for all things are his. You'll shape that inside of them. Like no one else other than dad is going to do that for them. And by 5, who they are and how they see the world has begun to set in and establish. The concrete has begun to settle and firm up. That their life is a gift to be molded and shaped by God's glory, that they're here for a purpose to join God in his rescue story here in this world, which is exactly what Moses grows up to do. He runs for a while, because all kids do. He runs for 40 years. So if your kid's been running for 39, there's still hope. He runs for 40 years. But then he walks back in and changes eternity for a nation. And that's what the Bible calls discipleship. Teaching someone who they are, whose they are, and why they're here. And that's the call of every mom and every parent. God calls a mom. to love, trust, and invest, to love her child more than her life, to trust God with her child more than herself, and to invest her life in discipling her child as best she can. All because moms are an influence for eternity, because they're an influence for God's glory in their and her children's life. Godly moms are a godly influence for God's glory in her children's life. And I'll close with this. I've been saying Moses' mom the whole time, just less of a mouthful than what I'm about to tell you. But does anybody know Moses' mom's name? Dan, you're a pastor, you don't count. Kevin, I already told you, you don't count either. I didn't know until Tuesday. I knew Moses' mom had a name, I just didn't know what it was. Moses' mom's name is written down in Numbers chapter 26, verse 59. The name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt, and she bore to Amram, Aaron, and Moses, and Miriam, their sister. Moses' mom's name is Jochebed. Oofta. That's Old Testament for Geraldine or Gertrude. I really hope that's not someone's middle name. But Jochebed was the mother of Moses and Aaron and Miriam. And Jochebed's name comes from two Hebrew words, Yocheved. Yocheved. It depends on if you did the O long or not. But either way, Yo and Yah are both shortened forms of Yahweh, Yahovah. Yah, beginning, Yo, Yahovah. They shorten the vowels together. Trust me, it's in there. And then kavod is the Hebrew word for glory. So her name is the shorthand of the glory of God, or God's glory. And God's glory bears Moses, the rescuer of God's people, and influences his life that he might be shaped and formed by the glory of God to spend his life in teaching others and displaying the glory of God. Because Hebrew names aren't just there for fun. They have meaning, they have purpose. And Yocheved, Moses' mom, was the influence of God's glory in Moses' life to shape Moses for God's glory in his life. Yocheved, Moses' mom, was the influence of God's glory in Moses' life to shape Moses for God to get glory out of Moses' life. And every mom in here, your name is not Yocheved. Thankfully, I would hate to have to teach a child to spell that. But you are, every single one of you. Bio mom, adopted mom, spiritual mom, mom, grandma, great-grandma. You are an influence for God's glory in your children's life. Young, old, wayward, has children of their own. You are an influence for God's glory in your child's life to shape your child, however young or old, for God's glory in their lives. Mom, the calling of God on your life is great. But as I remember growing up singing, the grace of God is greater still. No mom's perfect, no one is. We're not pretending. It's not what the day's about, but it is about celebrating the good. It's about celebrating the influence, the investment, the love, the trust and the faith that mom has shown and displayed and poured into the life of her kiddos. Because every act of love, every act of faith, every act of discipling her child is an overflow of the grace of God, of what she has received in putting her faith in Jesus and overflowing that into those that Jesus has given her. And so we thank you for what you've done. We thank you for the prayers, for the Bible stories, for the thousands of questions in the way home from school and church that you've tried to field an answer that not even PhDs in theology might not have been able to have. But you got to step into that moment when the heart was broken, when they're on the other end of the phone and life has fallen apart and you can't do anything but sob and pray with them. And you don't have answers. You're not sure how to fix it, even if you could. But the grace of God flowing into your soul flows out of you into those that God has given you and entrusted you. And so for that, we say thank you. And for that, I can stand here and say, like, God's got a big calling. Like, Love your kids more than yourself. Trust God with them more than yourself, and invest yourself in them until you meet Jesus. But the grace of God is great enough for you to do that. Every step of the way, every stumble, every fumble, He's there with you. He's got you as you're walking with those that He's given you. And so we say thank you, and we can't wait for the next step with you. Father, thank you for these women that you've put in our life by your sovereign, wise grace. That our mom is our mom, that our grandma is our grandma. That the women you've put in our life to shape us, to love and look like Jesus, have been put there to be evidence of your grace. And so we just stop in a moment of silence and thousands of reasons that we're thankful to just say, thanks be to God for Mom. God, would you help the moms in the room? Would you help all of us in the room? But particularly the moms today, to love their children more than their life. To continue to trust their children with you more than themselves. And to continue to give them the wisdom and the grace and the faith to invest their faith in their children. Because God, so many of us are only here today. So many of us are here today in such large part because of the influence of Mom in our life. And so for her, we say thank you and praise be to God. It's in Jesus' name we pray.